Kennedy, Alderman Boyd, Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Coatar,
Here.
Alderman Ogilvy,
Here.
Alderwoman Boyd, Alderman Bosley,
Here.
Alderman Oldenburg,
Present.
Chairman Rhodey.
Present.
5 present.
We have a full agenda today, so we'll go ahead and get started right away. We have an update on the Economic Development Plan. We have an appointment to one of our boards, and then we have a number of board bills. So I believe the appointment from the board is from the 27th Ward, and the Alderwoman from the 27th Ward isn't here, but is on her way. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the update on the Economic Development Plan, if we could. Mr. Director, you want to share it with us, what's going on?
Several handouts here. Thank you.
Everybody have their, proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I think, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. My task today is to give you an update on where we are with the economic development strategy update. And but as I start, I want to just point out that a number of my colleagues are in the audience and can also help answer some questions. So I refer to Deputy Mayor Linda Martinez, who is sitting here, and Don Rowe, who's the Director of Planning, who's been on the committee, as well as Matt Bauer, who is one of the financial analysts, and John Ferry, who is actually the project manager for this effort, and crafted a number of things here. We have a number of folks who are probably on the selection committee is also present. So we have enough folk here who can answer questions in great detail, but I'll present and give you a sense of where we are. Just by way of background, we issued an RFP back in late June of 2018. There were 17 firms that responded from across the country. And these were highly acclaimed firms. Many of them were highly acclaimed. Firm qualifications were reviewed in August of 2018, and we narrowed down the list from 17 to the top 6 firms. And the firms that are listed on your handout there in alphabetical order: AECOM, Fourth Economy, HR&A, ICIC, Mass Economics, and TIP Strategies. So we actually narrowed that down to 2 firms. The six finalists had 30 days to submit a complete proposal. Those proposals were turned in at the beginning of October, and the selection panel interviewed all 6 of those firms. Following the interviews, the panel narrowed the finalists down to the 2 firms, that's Mass Economics and TIP Strategies. And after one final round of questions, the panel chose Mass Economics. That was in mid-October to lead our effort. Contract negotiations ensued, and a contract was signed in November of 2018. A little bit about Mass Economics. They're based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. The team members include Teresa Lynch from Mass Economics, Scott Page from Interface Studio, Tony Griffin, Urban Planning for the American City, Jarrell Jones, 19 Square Solution. And you can see some of the sample projects that they've worked on, to include Detroit, Future City, the Atlanta Beltline, Pittsburgh, I think it's the Innovation District there, and Shoto Greenway. So some of these members are working on Shoto Greenway as well. with Ashton Park. The strategy framework, there were two handouts that were passed to you. One is an actual detailed list of the framework, but this is sort of a summary of what that framework is, essentially. And I won't read it to you, but you get a chance to take a look at what we were looking at. The strategy, foundation, and framing, they were sort of the guiding principles and what the vision is about. And the assessment and benchmarking and evaluation, market and industry cluster analysis and strategy, neighborhood economic nodes. Want to pick out some of those throughout the city, and then the implementation strategy and plans. And so the details to those 6 are on your second handout there. So quickly, the scope of work summary, that part 1 is the assessment, benchmarking, and evaluation. And you can see the details that are there, essentially looking at the profiles throughout the city, city economic analysis, going into detail there, and a summary analysis of the industry cluster. All of that is in the part 1 area. And you can ask questions about this later or now if you choose to. But the scope of work for part 2, as you can see here, the market and industry cluster analysis and strategy. So essentially, we're looking at a detailed reporting of the city's economic drivers and outcomes, all the way through to design of a 5-year industry subcluster growth strategy. So those are some very detailed things that we are asking the consultants to do for us. On the scope of work for part 3, the neighborhood economic nodes, sort of a place-based growth strategy. They will do windshield surveys, corridor tours to collect data, and real estate analysis, parcel characteristics, potential uses and cost that would be provided. Doing a land use analysis and topology to identify key job creations and equitable growth trades, growth nodes rather. And so those are some of the key things that will be happening in the scope of work for part 3. And I think one of the more important things here is the site planning for some key nodes that are in the city. And so as we look throughout the city, it's not just the central corridor. I just want to make a big point. This is throughout the city. We will pick key nodes to plan around. So the scope of work for part 4 was the implementation strategy and plans. And you can see the details there. Actually coming up with a plan for how we will make this an actionable plan as opposed to just a document that will sit on the shelf. And scope of work 5, which is a continuation of the implementation strategy. That's the next slide. And then scope of work part 6, a continuation of our implementation strategy and plans. So you can read those details as to what is happening there, as well as for scope of work part 7, which is communications and content, sort of the public engagement piece, which is, we feel, the most important part of this effort is to engage with the public and have public engagement sessions, and that will happen through the study. So one of the key things that we will want to do is to work with you all and work with the citizenry of the city to find out what people are thinking and what their thoughts are. So taking a look at the work that's already underway, the market and industry cluster analysis and strategies underway. The consultants have put together data on the city and the regional economy, currently analyzing the strengths and currently researching economic opportunities. They're working to identify neighborhood economic nodes and develop place-based strategies. They've pulled together various public and private sector databases on real estate trends and vacancy, and performed the first windshield survey of the commercial corridors, and they're updating the databases at this time. If we go to the next slide, which is work to be completed in Q1 of 2019, they will draft the economic growth strategies, summaries of land and real estate conditions, summarize that, preliminary identification of employment districts and nodes, look at best practices for inclusive urban economic development, and we will form a steering committee and convene that steering committee. We're in the process of doing that at this point. So work to be completed in the second quarter. Be a series of neighborhood meetings to identify assets, existing neighborhood economic activity, the opportunities, initiatives, and find residents' preferences and aspirations. Citywide public meeting to present initial findings for feedback and discuss improving systems that link residents to jobs, wealth, and opportunity, and look at some of the final economic growth strategies that might come out of that. Identification of the city growth nodes and their characteristics, looking at by industries and real estate product, and look at a draft implementation strategy that will be in the second quarter. Looking at the third quarter, be continued public outreach on plan redevelopment, and looking at the final implementation strategies, and that will be a date and time that we will, if everything goes okay, we are looking to try and provide some finality, or start to look at some finality in the September of 2019 timeframe. And so, Chair, we're looking at our next steps as one, identifying the steering committee, forming a city advisory team, also looking at developing some focus groups, identifying the folks that are in that. There will be additional individual interviews of folks that are identified that we think will show a diversity of the city, but also some very key folk that we think can provide some input to this process. There will be roundtable discussions with focus groups, and we will begin the community engagement process. So those are the things that will happen in the future. So I guess I could summarize this by saying that this process is underway. We hope that it will yield a product that will be able to answer some of the questions that this committee has asked us in the past. It relates to the ordinance that you all passed that indicated that we should provide a report to you back in September. While we will not have it this complete by that time frame, it will be far enough along for us to provide some key data points to you as other things that are provided as well. So, Mr. Chair, I'm complete if you have questions.
Alderman Boyd is asked to be excused. Alderman Davis has as well. Alderman Coatar, do you have any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Ogilvie.
Otis, I mean, what do you think are the most, are going to be the most important outcomes of this study? I mean, to my eye, like the part 2 scope of work looks pretty important in terms of developing a citywide economic strategy for employment growth.
I think the development of the strategy, but I think, to me, one of the most important part of this is going to be the community engagement part of it, where we get people to interact and dialogue and help us understand what their aspirations and what their concerns are. And then we, through the process, develop and understand, based on the statistics that are gathered and the effort by the study team, to come up with a strategy to make it all work. I'll answer my teammates if anyone else here would like to comment on it.
thing I think of, Linda Martinez, thank you for listening to us about where we are and where we're going, but I think about the interaction with other efforts that are going on in the city right now. For example, Metro Reimagined. They're doing some amazing work and talking about how to get people north and south, east and west to jobs. And I think if we take what we're doing with our strategy here and aligning it with where can people get transit to jobs, back to homes on the north and south, east and west, I think, you know, that it's a way for us to also imagine how we grow and draw on the resources that our citizens are paying for with their metro taxes and other things like that. So I think it's going to be an exciting process.
Thanks. And then you guys look at this as a document that between SLDC and the mayor's office, you'll have maybe primary responsibility for trying to implement, or as a guiding document that you refer to, you know, as opportunities arise?
I think it's a guiding document, but it would be, we hope that this strategy, which is what we're talking about here, is something that is sort of a roadmap on how we proceed forward to, you know, to actually actualize some of the recommendations that we think will come out of this.
Okay. I don't have any other questions.
Alderwoman Boyd, I know you just stepped in, but did you have any questions?
No, right now.
Alderman Bosley, do you have some questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good morning. Certainly appreciate you all being here. And I know this is a lot of work, especially trying to plan for an entire city, so definitely appreciate the efforts. I know it's a little early in envisioning what this entire city can look like, but I want to ask, in light of what's going on with the city right now, in 2 years we can be looking at a totally different structure in the way we do development across the region, seeing that we have this city-county merger creeping up upon us. SLDC, from my understanding, will cease to exist, and the city itself will not have development rights for itself to be able to develop anything. There'll be a board set up, that task force that will be deciding on development. So are we looking at any way how to tie in with what we want for our city and protect whatever it is, the efforts that we all are putting forth collectively right now? So if that does happen, and if that is something that we will be privy to, that we still have some control over it is what we want based on what we already have brought to the table and what we've been working on for years, or up until that point.
I think we should continue to think about the future of our city as it might be reimagined as part of a much larger metro city. I don't think that Chesterfield is stopping what it's doing. I don't think Kirkwood's stopping what it's doing. I think we're still looking at, each city is looking at how does it deliver services to citizens, how does it increase its revenue, how does it increase its population. And, you know, I think that the Metro St. Louis is going to be a framework for a much larger, you know, city potentially to help us compete with Nashville and Indianapolis. But, you know, how do we deliver services within the city and generate the revenue and increase the population? And we've got infrastructure for 300,000 people. You know, I think we need to think about how do we grow the city regardless of our future as part of Metro St. Louis.
Well, I think we need to think about it all, because those municipalities get to stay municipalities and we will cease to exist. St. Louis is gone. We become St. Louis County Municipality. That's what it says. That's what the name will be. We won't have a name. Every other municipality in the city, all those counties get to stay counties. So
I think we, you know, I don't know enough details to answer the question. So
well, I'm just putting out the facts so I can make sure that this is on record, that we are having that conversation, because it is an important conversation to have before these things start to happen. We only have a year to start talking about these things. So I just wanted to ask if that was something SLDC was thinking about at all, seeing as, you know, we do have the recommendation coming out and this will be law if this is something that happens. So it definitely affects your entire office.
Well, I think it would still be part, if you know, we come up with, you know, with hopefully is what is a great strategy for developing this part of Metro St. Louis. It still would be something that would be part of the future of Metro St. Louis. I apologize, I don't know the detail, and I don't know the facts that you're putting out there, so I can't address those.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any more questions, Mr. Chairman.
No more questions?
No, sir. Thank you.
Alderman Oldenburg?
No, none at this time. Looks like you're off to a good start. Good job.
Thanks. Have we set up like at what point do you anticipate engaging the public? I guess that's probably in here. Have we set up a website or some
In the
place?
second quarter, we will be fully engaged in doing that.
Okay, so we'll have a website. And
Yeah, well, I think in the first quarter, there will be a number of interviews with selected individuals, but the major engagement with the public is in the second quarter.
With regard to neighborhood nodes, is there something I felt strongly about for some time that we've had some resistance to the comptroller? Has there been any discussion about TIF districts as opposed to, has that come up yet? Or
We have not gotten to that
okay,
point
that's
yet.
a little-
I'm sure it
little
will be
further
part
down
of a
the line.
discussion, though.
Okay. Great. Well, I want to thank you for this and giving us an update and everything. We had also, and in anticipation of the meeting, we traded a couple emails, I believe, with Matt Bauer. But we were, I guess, anticipating a report showing us incentives tied to building permits. And my understanding, Matt, if you just want to update us on where we are on that, or if there's no other questions on this subject, I think it's somewhat related, but we're kind of moving a little bit here. Oh, sure. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Could I ask a question to both of you? I heard Alderman Bosley's concern in regards to the city-county merger, but I guess I'm looking at where we are right now as far as how you're looking at, because Otis and Linda both are real clear where I'm standing in regards to development within the North Quarter. Where are we in regards to the people that's going to be doing this, to work with those older people to look at that
The
piece?
direction is definitely, we'll be working with all of the aldermen and throughout all of the major corridors and neighborhoods. So no one will be left behind.
Okay, because the reason why I'm asking, because I'm just not a isolated person on one island, and so I have to connect the dots. So with my ward is the 2nd, 1st, 22nd, and the 3rd, and 21st. So I look at that as a whole piece. So that's how I'm trying to rationalize how we would look at that whole quarter and to say, okay, how is this going to look in 20 years? Regardless to the city-county thing, how will we be impacted in regards to this? And then, like his question, will it continue to go on even if that happens?
It is my opinion that it will. I don't think that, I think the work that we do here will be taken by those that, if there is a consolidation or whatever, that, it is good work that can be followed into the future regardless of how it's formed.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Matt?
Matt Bauer, SLDC. So I think the direction we were kind of going was to take, I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but from the building division, we get a monthly list of building permits. This is pretty much separate from the previous discussion. This is a more specific issue. But we get a monthly list of building permits, and the request was, could we tie those building permits to abatements, TIFs, and I've also not added here, but we'll also look at which of those building permits are tied to tax exempt properties, such as like development in BJC. So originally we had looked at doing this as a manual effort, and but we decided to make it a much bigger effort and to automate it. Walker from the IT, Walker Hamilton, and I have kind of been working on a way to tie the building permit system with the assessor system and also SLDC data to automate the process, to be able to give us statistics on a kind of a continuous basis without the manual effort. And as we use this as kind of as a test case, matching the permits to abatement and TIF, we might be able to find other ways to utilize the data for reporting and statistical analysis going forward. If you've got, so what we're looking at here, these are just samples. So this is looking at just going back. We wanted to go back a little bit. So this is a sample of a May 2017 that building permit report, and breaking it, doing a summary table of the number of permits for different types of projects, project totals, units, and square footage, and then at the bottom of those properties, how many were included as part of a TIF district, how many had active tax abatement, and then the second page is not directly related, but this is kind of where we're going, a sample of where we'd like to go, and hopefully what we'll see when you guys come back in the session. But this would be a detailed breakdown of every permit, what type of project it is, units, construction value, and square footage isn't on here now, but we'd have square footage, who's doing the work, what ward it is, and then whether it's tax abated, TIFT, or tax exempt. I think right now, so we've got most of this in place right now. I think our next challenge is there's a gap between when tax abatements are approved and tax abatements are implemented, because the tax abatement is implemented at the time of project completion. So if you see a building permit issued, obviously the project is not yet complete. We would need to tag that to the tax abatement that has been approved by the board but not yet implemented. So that's the next challenge. I think that will tie to some to databases that we're implementing within SLDC to kind of track that interim period. But I think we're well on our way, and that should be ready to go, like I said, by the time the board is back in session. So we can keep you updated. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or Walker's here to address any, of the more technical details.
I might, just looking at it, I see that you've missed some of the tax abatement on some of the projects in the 17th. So
This is just that data is kind of dummy data on that side. So I just wanted to show an example of what it would look like. So don't take this as actual data. I'm sorry about that.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
it's, I don't think, quite tied together.
And I could go through that, and then that's the manual effort we're trying to get away from. But we can automate it. But that integration of the databases will give us a lot more power to do reporting and statistical analysis going forward, rather than taking the monthly report from the building division and manually entering, looking each permit up and attaching data to it. So
just so everybody understands where we're going with this, at some point we'll be able to take a look and see kind of a ratio of how much the value of tax abatement or TIF relative to the amount of building permits that have been issued, and we'll be able to take a look at that in a variety of different ways, whether it's tax exempt entities or...
Yeah, and that's why the first table, we did go back to 2017, because hopefully a lot of those projects are completed or done. So that you can see here, for example, if we've got $191 million of building permits, so what's that, about 5%? 5% of those were in a TIF district, and only a small amount had tax abatement. Now, that's not the case if you look at the broad category. That just happens to be what happened that month. But we'll be able to give that reporting to you on an ongoing basis, and also go back and do a historical by doing it by ward, by et cetera, et cetera. So we'll be able to do, by doing it in a more comprehensive way, we'll be able to do a deeper and I think more valuable analysis.
Great. Any questions of Mr. Bauer? Alderman Coatar?
No questions.
Alderman Ogilvy?
Nope.
Alderwoman Boyd?
No.
Alderman Bosley?
No questions. Thank you.
Alderman Oldenburg? No. Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone from SLDC for coming over and joining us today. Okay, next up is our appointment to the St. Louis Housing Authority. And we have Ms. Anetta Booth. Ms. Booth? Ms. Booth, thank you very much for coming down today. We have a request to interview appointments, and I don't know if you have something for us, but perhaps you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in this serving on the St. Louis Housing Authority, and then what we can do is open it up to questions for committee members. Oh, great.
Okay, my name is Anetta Booth. I brought my resume so you get a little glimpse of me. Which my resume show that I'm a retired school teacher. I worked at Trans World Airlines and American Airlines, which I retired for 27 years. My first job was with the St. Louis Police Department. I started with the police department as a teenager. Part of the Neighborhood Youth Corps, which was a branch of President Johnson's War on Poverty, which was really a great program, something I wish we had going now to teach young people to work and build a strong foundation. I'm a resident of the 27th Ward. I've been in the 27th Ward since 1970. I'm active in the 27th Ward Committee in their housing, voter registration, and beautification. And also, I'm the committee chair for the Urban League for Area 12. Through the ward and also with the Urban League, I get my neighbors involved. We do things to build up our community. I'm invested in my neighborhood, and I get the other members of the neighborhood invested. In October, we did a national night out. The area where I live in is unique. It runs into Jennings, which we had invited the St. Louis City and the County Police Department. We're trying to have a good neighborhood. We're trying to solve some of the police problems, and that is getting people involved with the police department, interacting with them. I mentioned that I worked for the police department, started off as a clerk, which I had the opportunity to work in police community relations. And in order to have a strong city, you have to have the police department and the citizens working together. And being on the housing committee, it would give me an opportunity to not only help serve on that committee, but to learn. We're all are lifetime learners, and the things I can learn, I can bring back to the community and help empower the other people in the community. We can only build St. Louis one block at a time.
Well, thank you, Ms. Booth. At this point, we will open it up to committee members and see if there's any questions. Alderman Coatar, do you have any questions?
No questions, Chairman.
Alderman Ogilvy?
No questions, but good luck, and thanks for being willing to serve on that board.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Boyd, I believe this is a constituent of yours. Do you have
Yes.
any questions or comments for us?
Well, I do know that she has been real active in regards to the processes within the ward, and what I'm proud of, the Housing Committee voted her to be the representative to sit on that commission. So they felt that she could bring a lot to the table, and she could help to bring people into the ward as residents. And so that's what that committee is doing. They're looking to bring up the census within the 27th ward.
Well, thank you, Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Bosley, any questions or comments?
Thank you for being here. Look forward to discuss some things. I appreciate it.
Alderman Oldenburg?
No questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, Ms. Booth, it looks like you've impressed the committee, and we'd like to, at this point, entertain a motion that we recommend Ms. Booth as being appointed to the St. Louis Housing Authority.
I move we appoint Anetta Booth to the St. Louis Housing Authority.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy, Alderman Boyd, Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Coatar,
Aye.
Alderman Ogilvy,
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderman Bosley, Alderman Oldenburg,
Aye.
Chairman Rhodey.
Aye.
6 aye votes.
By your vote, we have confirmed the mayor's recommendation, and we'll refer that back to the full board. Thank you, Ms. Booth, for your willingness to serve and coming down here on such a cold day. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We have a collection of bills from the alderman from the 16th, and then we have a bill from the alderman from the 7th. Alderman from the 7th, were you wanting to hold that?
Yeah, I'd like to hold that bill, Chairman.
Okay, so we will hold that, and then we have a bill from the alderwoman from the 19th, and I do not have my phone. I know that she said that she wasn't going to be able to make it today, but I do not know her intention. Does anyone know, is this bill advertised? It was advertised. Okay, I don't have my phone with me, so I can't text her or anything, but why don't we go ahead and hear Board Bill number 192. We'll pass it out of the committee, assuming everybody's in support of it, we'll pass it out of the committee, and then she can, sure, why don't you, if you don't mind, please.
Good morning. My name is Roman Cordell. I'm a planner with the city's Planning and Urban Design Agency. Board Bill 192, which was introduced by Alderwoman Davis, proposes the establishment of a planned unit development district. This is an overlay zoning district that provides a little more flexibility than the city's standard underlying zoning districts of A through L. We don't oftentimes use it, but we are using it in this case for this particular development project. This PUD, as we call it, that's the acronym, is being proposed for a one-block section of Olive Street located between Vandevenner and Spring in the Covenant Blue Grand Center neighborhood. The PUD site is shown in Exhibit A of Board Bill 192. The site currently consists of 26 vacant lots and 2 vacant buildings, so it's clearly a blighted area. The PUD is proposing a very creative and unique development project. It calls for the construction of 12 single-family buildings, 5 two-family buildings, a 24 to 36-unit apartment building, and the renovation of an existing building on the south side of Olive, as well as the construction of 10 additional homes on the north side of Olive. A site plan of the development project is included in the board bill. The petitioner is Olive West Properties, LLC. They own all of the 28 parcels in the site. Steve Trampy is one of the principals of the firm. He's here today and probably elaborate more on the specifics of the development project. The PUD was approved by the Planning Commission earlier this month, and if it's approved by ordinance, a more detailed development plan would be submitted by the petitioner and be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission later this spring. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And as I mentioned, Mr. Trampy, one of the representatives of the, or one of the principals of the development firm is also here today.
Why don't we bring Mr. Trampy up? Mr. Trampy, I thought you had given up on the city development stuff. Now, this is about your fourth time that you retired from doing city development?
I've never retired. I've just taken breaks.
Okay. Mr. Trampy was one of the early pioneers in the Central West End, and I can attest that if we had about 200 more people like Mr. Trampy, the whole city would have been fixed up by now. But anyway, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing down here? It's great that you're
Sure.
still interested
I know
in
you've
the
got a
city,
busy
still doing
agenda.
things.
Just briefly, as you may know, Olive is probably the oldest and most important road in the early development of the city. It was the Wood Plank Road. It was before that even a trail out by which Daniel Boone's family brought salt to the city, which the city couldn't survive otherwise. And through its history, it's had trolley cars, a trolley cable car line on it. It's had mansions. It's had commercial buildings, theaters. It's most, unfortunately, when 40 was built and cut off Grand Center, and all of a sudden it was all about car parking. It was such a densely developed area, the area died. So a lot of the mansions were torn down for warehouses. A lot of the theaters were torn down for warehouses. And it's, as you know, it's been a long struggle. I first got involved in Grand Center with Lou Barra and the first executive director, Jeff Simmerl, in I think the late 70s. We've done 3 projects down there, including the Continental building. This is a project that we first worked on 12 years ago. It's, as Roman mentioned, it's almost in essence 2 city blocks, but it's kind of a block and a half between Spring and Olive. It's been in the redevelopment plan as a planned residential block for, 20 years, 30 years. I don't know when it was first put in. It's a part of the Vandervanter Spring Redevelopment Corporation. What we're doing here is something very unique and unique in the country. This is not a for-profit project. This is also not a non-profit project. This is a project that will lose a lot of money. Because by its nature, it really cannot be one that makes money. We are, what we want to do is kind of achieve 2 things. We want to build unique housing, where we become almost a tourist attraction like Columbus, Indiana, where people come to look at the different architecture in this block. We will have, right now we have 4 international architects involved. We may end up with as many as a dozen or more. We also have 4 local architectural firms involved. And so we want to develop housing that is unique, that people will say, wow, I've not seen anything like this in residential. But we're also trying to keep the price point as low as we can. And so instead of just doing infill all along the street, where you really are forced to do 2- and 3-story buildings, where it's really hard to build a structure, a two-story structure for less than $400,000 or $500,000. We have single-family, we have 1-story units spread around the site that we hope to start under 300. And we are able to do some really unique layouts in this block because there is no other housing. There really are no other buildings in this block, with the exception of Matt Foggy's house and the one building, that historic building that we're rehabbing as the amenities for the project. There are a lot of challenges to this, from MSD to planning to construction to layout to streets, and I'm involved because I saw it as a challenge. We've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go on it, and I'm not saying we're breaking rules, but certainly there's a lot of things involved in this project that really, and from a review standpoint, a lot of people haven't necessarily seen before. So with that, I'll leave it at that, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Alderman Ogilvy?
So the PUD will just avoid you guys having to get like individual conditional use or Board of Adjustment variances for every time you go get one of these single-family permits, correct?
Right.
Correct?
Right.
Okay. I mean, this seems like a very neat, exciting project. You said it's like destined to lose money?
Oh, no, it will lose a lot of money.
That's the only type of real estate deals that Steve
Yeah, no.
likes to be involved in.
I've done other projects in the city where I thought they were going to make money and they lost money. This one, we know day one is going to lose money, so it makes it special.
Should I leave that where it is, or should I be more curious about
You're asking the questions.
Well, I hope you lose as much money as you want to lose then as well. Good luck.
Alderwoman Boyd, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Alderman Bosley?
No questions.
Alderman Oldenburg?
No questions, thank you.
All right, well, I'll ask the question. I'll go where nowhere else dares to go. What is, you're losing money, what's your source, or
The primary source,
maybe, or?
the primary source of the subsidy will be through Olive West, will be through Mrs. Pulitzer.
So, in other words, this is a demonstration project to...
Well, I would say I would change that word only because a demonstration, no one's going to do a second one.
Okay.
We're going to demonstrate, it's great, but that financially you'd never want to do it again.
Okay, so the idea is almost to make it somewhat of a tourist attraction or something to augment what's going on in the district?
Yeah, but to create a neighborhood where there is no neighborhood. I mean, this is unique about this block, that there is no, you talk about neighborhood associations, and there's nothing here. And so it's a blank palette, and so we want people to buy there that say, you got to live in this. This is an incredible project, because the way this is designed, all of them will see each other a lot. I mean, it's not a commune, but the amenities and the way everything is shared, we want to create a neighborhood out of nothing that is very special.
Do you have any site plans yet, or?
Oh yeah, well, the site plan you've got in the package, right?
That's correct. I think it's the second or third last page from the end of the board bill. You'll see it sometime.
How about elevations? Any elevations yet?
We're working with the four architects so far. We've had some, but we haven't wrapped up schematics with the four of them yet.
As I mentioned before, with regards to the PUD process, pending the approval by the Board of Aldermen to an ordinance establishing this PUD, the next step would be for Steve and his colleagues to submit a detailed development plan that will have a lot more details in terms of the massing, elevations, things of that nature, and that will be brought before the Planning Commission for its final review and approval.
Looks like you have some unusual setbacks on here. Is that, I presume, deliberate?
Yes, we want to interdisperse the units throughout the site. So you can choose, if you want to be on the street, you can choose a site to have your house built that's on the street. If you want to have your house in the courtyard, you can pick a site that's in the courtyard.
And are those driveways or?
No, there are no driveways. What we tried to do is design it where there's no surface parking. So there's the only parking on the entire 5.5 acres that's surface are 10 spots off of Vandevanner for maintenance and service and employees for the apartment building.
So there's no street parking?
No, there's street parking, but on the site itself, there isn't any surface parking.
And would these all be fee simple then?
They're all fee simple, yes.
And so
You're just buying the pad, and you're part of the
I presume
association.
you have a series of easements or something for people to get back to the interior pads then?
Yeah, there's a general easement across the whole common area for all of the owners.
Great. There are no other questions. The chair will entertain a motion that we pass out of Board Bill number 192.
I move we pass Board Bill 192 with the due pass recommendation.
Second.
Second, we have the alderman from the 7th had to run to court, but if we do have a good roll with him on it, so if we could have a request for previous roll.
Ms. Rowe.
Hearing no objections, we'll consider Board Bill number 192 as heard and passed out of committee with a due pass recommendation. We are now to the alderman from the 16th, who is going to take up most of our time today. Alderman, you want to step up and tell us what you're working on here?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. If it's possible to start with Board Bill 196, but I know we'll take these one at a time, but they are inextricably linked, not only to each other this morning, but also to the overall Smart City Initiative and the small wireless board bills and ordinance that we passed at the end of last year regarding the use of and permitting process for small wireless facilities throughout the city. So I hope we could start with 196. That's okay. Excellent. So as you might know, just to back up again and frame this from the treetops, we passed a small wireless facilities ordinance at the end of last year that really regulated, as a result of a bill passed in Jeff City, House Bill 1991, which talked about the use of small wireless facilities in the rights of way, knowing that we also had to comport with that House bill in Jeff City, also to our building code, as well as the necessary changes that are going to need to be made to our zoning code. So we addressed the right of way, but knew we would have to come back and also insert small wireless language and amendments to our building code, which we did and introduced a bill in the Streets Committee a couple of weeks ago, and now also have to address the zoning changes. So Board Bill 196 effectively adds the definitions and the terms associated with micro wireless or small wireless facilities to these various districts within the bill. So if you'll just, really quickly on at the bottom of page 2, the following definitions are hereby added to the various sections of the zoning code. And it effectively are the definitions that came down from the state and are also in the comprehensive bill that we passed at the end of last year. We have Rebecca Wright here from the City Councilor's office, if there are any questions, as well as Robert Gaskell Clemens, the city's Chief Technology Officer. But effectively, these are cleanups, are adds to the zoning code so that we can be in compliance with state law around the use of small wireless facilities.
So this is for the zoning code itself, and then I guess we have several other.
Correct.
As if you could give us a little bit.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. So as you know, our zoning code, we have special use districts. We also have form-based districts. So those are considered separate from the zoning code in some respects because they deal with specific districts. So, and they carry a different different regulations and use requirements as our zoning code. So those are treated separately and have the same, have to comport with the same language and restrictions that were in House Bill 1991 governing small wireless facilities.
So 197 would be one of the districts, 198 would be a different district, and then what is 195 then?
195 is a special use district, also
Okay.
a separate district.
Okay. So, but this is the, 196 is the actual zoning code
Correct.
for the whole city then?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And it talks about the various districts in there and adds the definition of small wireless facilities to them.
All right. Alderman Ogilvy, any questions?
No. Are these, this definition looks, I guess I do have, sorry, I guess I do have a question. This definition looks different than the bill we passed a couple weeks ago in the full board. Is a small wireless facility?
That may be the case, but I don't think so. I don't think so. I'll let Rebecca from the City Council's office address that.
These definitions mirror the definitions and were taken directly from House Bill 1991. So I don't know what you looked at last, I think everything was supposed to be consistent between the bills. So if you see something, please point that out.
Well, I hit my head a lot when I was a kid, so I may be
Okay.
misremembering.
Okay.
But the point is just, we're approving a definition of these in the zoning code so that every time a small wireless facility gets installed, as long as it fits in this definition, they don't need a variance to do that installation, correct?
Not entirely. These are uses that are going to be allowed and permitted as required under House Bill 1991 in zones B through L, but in the A zone, they will not be a use by right. So they would need to get a variance if they want to go into the A zone, which is
Right.
allowed under House Bill 1991.
Okay, that makes sense. No other questions, thank you.
Alderman Boyd?
No questions.
Alderman Bosley?
Yes, sir. It's just a few. So my question really has a little more to deal with the next bill, which is 195, but since these are all linked, what are the reasons you don't want the area special use district to not be subject to the new zoning regulations?
So because there's an overlay zone, it had its own sets of definitions, and because House Bill 1991 has required us to use certain definitions in order to regulate small wireless facilities, what we did is we removed the unique or different types of definitions that were placed into that bill, the Lighthouse District, so that it would default back to the zoning code. So essentially, I hope this is making sense. We don't want to trigger a different set of regulations or a different interpretation. We want everything to be consistent. So when we put language in there that references cell towers, what is that exactly? We don't know. We don't have a definition in the zoning code, and there's no specific definition in the Lighthouse District for cell towers. So what we did by removing that, it will default back to the definition that is now going to be in the zoning code, so the interpretation can be consistent with what's already in the zoning code or will be in the zoning code and consistent with House Bill 1991.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I guess I just need more clarification. On page 2 of 195, it's line 11 says, notwithstanding, conditional use regulations for the SUD, notwithstanding any zoning district use or conditional use regulations contained in the zoning code. To the contrary, the following uses may be allowed in the SUD as conditional uses, and I do see where you added in, no, it's nothing added.
I'm sorry, Alderman, which bill are you on? Are you on 196?
195.
Can we, Mr. Chairman, just for simplicity's sake, can we take these separately? I mean, Brandon, or
Well,
Alderman,
I think they go hand in hand, which is why I'm asking the question. So the question is why is it that, you know, we want to pass this, but we don't want it to affect, that's just the question, to affect the special light district? I'm just trying to get an idea. That's it.
So it is going to affect the special, so I'm not sure which language you're pointing out to, but the only change.
11 through 13 on 195.
Oh, that's
it.
existing language right now that's currently in there, and all we're doing is removing the language cell phone transmitters on buildings. That's it. That's all that's being removed. So what's the strikeout there has to do with that, so that way it will conform to existing language that's in the zoning code.
and that removal of language allows us to stay in the confines of state law as well.
Okay, I got you. So we didn't change anything to the zoning code, we just added, correct? Did we remove anything from the actual, and this is Board Bill 196. now that we're
Looks like
speaking
just
about it.
added definitions. I don't see any strikes.
Did we strike anything out? Is there anything?
Don't.
Just wanted to make sure. Like right here, use regulations.
Does not in the copy I have. I don't see any.
All right, so right here on page 9, section 2624, 020. So what we added was section, well, we struck out 1, 2, and 3 and added A, B, and C.
Right.
Right.
That's merely because all the other sections, when they would have the numbering, would have A, B, and C, and for some reason this had 1, 2, and 3. So that's just a correction.
Just a correction.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was clear that there's consistency throughout the code as to how things are numbered. Okay.
Gotta ask.
Yeah.
Right, gotta ask. Okay, so, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Just make sure this is what I'm saying. Okay, yeah, those are the questions that I had. I don't think there was anything else after reading through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman.
No problem.
Okay, if there are no other questions on Board Bill number 196, the chair will entertain a motion to pass out of committee with the do-pass recommendation, Board Bill number 196.
I recommend we pass Board Bill 196 out with the do-pass recommendation.
Second.
It was moved by the Alderman from the 3rd, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 27th. Is there a request for previous roll?
Previous roll.
Is there a request for previous roll? Hearing no objection, we'll consider Board Bill number 196 pass out of committee with the do-pass recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I think there may be a member of the audience who's interested in speaking on some of these, so.
Yeah, I think that's with regard to
I
195.
appreciate that. I am always negligent in that. Was there some people signed up to speak on behalf of these? I'm sorry. Should we have,
Yeah, go for it.
by all means, members of the committee, I'm always negligent in doing that, so anytime you observe that, please,
He said this is for 195, not 196.
okay, so he's signing up for 195, okay. So 195,
I wrote down 196, so he might want to just speak to that.
okay,
so.
sure.
I'm happy to speak both in one comment in the interest of timeliness, or speak separately if the Alderman would prefer.
My name is David Stokes. I'm the Executive Director of Great Rivers Habitat Alliance. We are a floodplain and wetlands conservation organization. We're also very concerned in relation to that conservation of those entities with migratory bird paths and migratory bird flights and the like. We're a St. Louis organization. We focus most of our efforts along the confluence of the great rivers of this region. And I put neutral on the card there. I'm certainly not opposed to anything in 196. I'm not opposed to 195 either. I understand that's about about language consistency in the rules. I do have some general concerns about a communications tower at the Lighthouse facility, the proposal up there, but I recognize that this 195 is not approving such at the time. So I just want to take a moment, since we're talking about the small wireless facilities, communication towers and the like here, to note that much of this area is along the Mississippi Flyway, North America's most heavily traveled migratory bird route, where estimates range from 40 to 60% of the migratory birds on this continent use the Mississippi Flyway. So we just wanted to, since we're here discussing communications towers and small wireless facilities, just wanted to enter one document into the record, which I'll give to the clerk in a moment, and just state that I would urge the city planning agency and the Board of Aldermen and others, when approving or considering cell towers, communications towers, small wireless facility towers, to take into consideration the guidelines of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that it is issued for such facilities and being designed and built in a way to minimize bird strikes and limit the damage to the migratory bird populations that such facilities can cause. And you can do that in a number of ways, by limiting the height, by making sure that the lighting is done in a modest flashing way instead of permanent lights, and there's a number of other recommendations that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has that would say, if not eliminating the risk to migratory bird populations, certainly to minimize them. And with that, I'd just like to enter the Fish and Wildlife Service recommendations into the record, and again, strongly urge that this board and others with the city take these suggestions into careful consideration when considering or approving any wireless facility towers or communications towers, particularly like in the Lighthouse District when they're so close to the Mississippi River. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. And again, my comments should be considered for both the bills, so I don't take up any more of your time on the next one, if that's okay with the Alderman.
Sure. Let me make sure I understand what your concern, what the issue is. So as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we're being mandated at the state level to alter our zoning requirements here at the local level to make it easier for cell towers to locate. And you're concerned that in the process of doing this, that we'll approve cell towers along the Mississippi River that would create potentially a hazard for birds as they're migrating?
All I'm doing is urging the city that when they're approved, when they're built, when you put out the recommendations, I would urge the developers, the builders, or whomever to adopt as much as possible these guidelines to minimize the threat to migratory bird populations. When you put these large towers up along the river, you do end up with a number of bird strikes and cause a number of deaths in the migratory bird populations, but there are things you can do to greatly reduce that.
I just want to make sure I understood, and I guess the next question is that within our authority? Are we, is this?
So technically, this is an overlay zone, but the underlying zoning code is still present. And this would be in the H zone. Under the H zone, this would be, a taller tower would be a conditional use. What we call the macro towers, what the industry calls the macro towers, but the state has not given that definition, so that's why we didn't use it. So technically what could happen is this would default back to the regular zoning code. Anybody who would want to construct or erect a tall tower like a macro tower would have to go to a conditional use hearing. And of course at that time, when hearing that, those conditions could be placed on it or could not be approved.
Okay, so the micro towers are not?
Yeah, the micro towers.
These are not a challenge to the birds?
The micro ones, to my understanding, I guess it would depend on how tall they are. They can only really go up to about 50 or 60 feet. Is that what? Here we go. He's the expert on this aspect of it.
Robert Gaskell-Clemens, Chief Technology Officer for the City of St. Louis. The maximum height for small wireless facilities, or what's being referred to as micro towers, are nowhere near tall enough to where they would start to pose a risk to migratory birds. The ones that could easily pose a risk to migratory birds are the macro towers, or the big ones that you see currently around the city that have the antennas around all the sides. Those have the potential to be tall enough to where they could pose a threat to migratory birds. So what we're doing and what we have to do with small wireless facilities, not a threat. But what we end up doing with the macro sites and the large towers could potentially be. Does that answer your questions?
Okay, so we can't really address this issue in this legislation. We'd have to address that in the zoning code.
We could address it in the zoning code. We could address it on a application basis if it's a conditional use. We could also address.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to permanently address it, you wouldn't want to do it in a
Yeah,
conditional
you would want to
use,
do it
you
in a
want
zoning code, yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right. What I would suggest is, I know very little about this. I would encourage you, if you feel strongly about it. I don't think what we're doing here today is going to impact your issue, if I understand it correctly. We'll certainly open it up to committee members. But if you are, it sounds like your permanent solution would be altering the zoning code to have prohibited areas or something.
We just take any opportunity we have to speak before legislative bodies to encourage adoption of these guidelines. So I do, as I said, that's why I'm not here opposing either of these bills. Just wanted to take the opportunity to state that into the public comment.
Okay. Are there any questions? I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
what was your name?
David Stokes, Great Rivers Habitat
Mr.
Alliance.
Stokes, are there any questions for Mr. Stokes? Alderman Ogilvy?
Nope.
Alderwoman Boyd?
What height were you looking at to think there was, would be a hinder that would impact the migration of the birds?
Well, again, the guidelines that I have are far more specific and engineering-based. I would say that even lower towers can sometimes be nesting sites, so there are sometimes guidelines for how you do landscaping for even lower towers that limit the damage to even shorter towers. Certainly, you get over 100 feet, which these towers, as explained, would not generally get to for this board. When you get over 100 feet, you get into the paths of the birds. But other than just height, there's lighting guidelines and other things that can be taken into consideration. And I'm sure your planning department people are aware of these, but I just wanted to take the opportunity here to enter that into the record and repeat it in a public forum.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman.
Alderman Bosley?
No questions. I understand your concern.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Stokes. Okay, why don't we go back, we'll circle back and we'll do Board Bill number 195. Alderman, do you have any other comments on 195?
I don't. I think that's kind of been explained, and let me just also say for the record, I know that Mr. Stokes has had an audience with the Planning Department and the Zoning Department, and I think they intend to be sensitive to this issue as it comes up in conditional use hearings and through that process. The last thing I want to be part of is any foul legislation down here. So.
Really, Tom?
Alderman Ogilvy, any questions?
I don't really have any questions, so thank you.
Alderman Bosley?
No questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed Alderwoman Boyd.
No questions.
Okay. The chair will entertain a motion on Board Bill 195.
I move we pass Board Bill 195 with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Set request for
Previous roll.
And now a request for previous roll. Board Bill 195 is passed out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
197.
197, sticking with the theme, more of the same here. This is a form-based district, and again, for the record, the 16th Ward doesn't have any plans of annexing the 17th or the 2nd in the previous bill, those wards. This is simply all under the same banner of the small wireless facilities and comporting with state law. So, Mr. Chairman, your borders are safely secured. Absolutely.
You don't have to put up any walls or anything?
No. But more of the same, this is also just making sure that the definition of utility and communication uses are inserted into the form-based district that exists in Forest Park Southeast with Board Bill 197.
Any questions on Board Bill 197? Alderman Ogilvy?
No questions, thanks.
Alderwoman Boyd?
No questions.
Alderman Bosley? No questions. Okay, hearing no other questions, the chair will entertain a motion that we pass out of Board Bill number 197.
I move that we pass Board Bill 197.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I'll request previous roll.
Request previous roll.
Hearing none, we'll consider Board Bill 197. Last Board Bill is 198. It's replay of 197.
Indeed, last piece of paper to push here this morning. This is the form-based zoning district that exists in the Central West End and contains the same definition update and addresses the utility and communication uses within that district.
Are there any questions? I don't think there are at this point. Chair will entertain a motion that we pass out Board Bill number 198 with the due pass recommendation.
Move we pass Board Bill 198 with the due pass recommendation.
Second.
Request previous roll.
Moved, seconded, request for previous roll. Hearing no objections, Board Bill 198 is passed out of committee with the due pass recommendation. We are done for
Thanks,
this
everyone.
session. Actually, we're not. We have had a request to come back before sine die to approve some appointments for one of the commissions or something. So we will probably come back before sine die, but we're at least done for a few weeks. So thanks, everyone, and meeting is adjourned.